I'm going to introduce Rob Knott, who is a returnee from Australia, and it actually doesn't say much about your career history of GHD, but I'm going to wing it a little bit here, Rob, because I kind of read through this. It's all very interesting. When I knew GHD in the earlier days in 1998, there was about 3,000 people. Now you have 10,000 people worldwide. You're not just in Australia and Asia. You have expanded into UK, America, South America, and you truly are a global, multidisciplinary engineering company. Your total quality. What's amazing, you're still a privately owned engineering, so that means that the people that work within GHD own the shares, and so that's where the passion is, that's where the quality is. A total quality engineering company. Here within Philippines, they're celebrating their 20th anniversary. Manny and Cheta, as Darren pointed out, is 0001. Number one. You're still my number one, Manny. And now you're expanding from Makati. You've expanded to Cebu. You're opening up an office in Quezon City, which is very excited because now Darren's got to go and drive to Quezon City, check the office. Good luck for that. So maybe Rob will buy you a helicopter. But you know, one thing that you guys, GHD does understand is that there's really 4 groups here in the Philippines that bring in new money. And you know, you have tourism, you have overseas contract workers, and you have call centers, of course, very little capital, and mining. And you see that some of the direct foreign investment is struggling with this anti-mining sentiment, but the minerals are always there. And God gave the Philippines these minerals, and they have to be developed, and preferably using GHD. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rob. Come on up here and give us your presentation. Put your hands together.
Well, that was a fantastic introduction from Johan, all off the top of his head as well. You must have paid a bit of attention when you used to work with us a little while ago to go. I'd like to just thank everyone for the opportunity to speak today at the Philippine Mining Club. It's great to be back here in Manila, see some familiar faces in the room, and also meet some long-term clients. I think as I was coming up, it was about 4 years ago. It's quite obvious that things continue to change. And as I travel around the world continues to change with increased volatility and uncertainty. And as I think back over that time, I'm sure the topics and conversations at these lunches have also varied greatly over that time. You know, I've been around the world this year speaking to a lot of groups as GHD celebrates 90 years in business. And I say that because it's a time frame we don't often reflect on when we think of mining or resource development or business, 90 years. And I'm sure 90 years ago in 1928, a fellow by the name of Gordon Guttridge, an engineer in Melbourne, couldn't have envisaged or imagined the company he started as one person would become something of the scale we have today across the world. Our revenues are just under $2 billion. We have more than 10,000 employees, as mentioned, but we're a small global corporation. We're small in the world. And something Johan mentioned earlier that makes us increasingly unique in our industry is the fact we are 100% employee owned. And before I talk about some of the things and some of my observations that give a company a sense of duration, a 90-year sense of purpose, I'll just give you a little bit of perspective on GHD as a company. You see some of our statistics there across the world. I think we've covered them. We're diversified. Mining and resources is just one of our sectors. If you look at where we've started and expanded from a beginning in Australia, we've balanced and diversified our business across North America, which is almost 40% of our revenues these days, into Asia, into South America, and in the Middle East and UK. And that gives you a great perspective of what's happening across the globe and how things are working for us. I think just on our performance there, and safety continues to be a key perspective. I want to make it pretty clear from the outset of my talk over lunch today is that I'm not a miner in terms of my own personal background and career, but I represent an organisation that provides professional services right across all of the sectors, global and regional clients, energy and resources companies, those in their supply chains and those in their demand value chains right across the world. And I thought just to speak at lunch today, I'd bring a perspective of the things I see, not just in the energy and resources sector, but things that impact engineering in its greatest sense across a whole range of industries: the environment, infrastructure, property, and energy and resources sectors. And I thought I'd just leave and talk about 5 things today. I'd first like to talk about sustainability. When you think about 90 years, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime for many people when we put things into that scale, and yet organisations, countries, civilisations last for periods of time that are much greater. And I think each of us in our professions, when we look inside and think about what we do and why we do it, we look for the things that last. And the greatest legacy that any one of us look back and speak proudly about are the things that last for more than a generation. They last more than a project, for longer than a project cycle, for longer than a few years, for longer than a commodity cycle. They're the things that make us proud. They're the things that make us feel like we're making a contribution. Today, across every profession in our sector, there's an increased social consciousness about everything that we do, whether it be waste, whether it be climate change, whether it be those who are less privileged, whether it be changes to those who are experiencing levels of poverty. There is a global increased consciousness about sustainability. And people are genuinely interested in the impact of our human activity. Corporations are interested. Financiers are interested. Looking at sustainability issues in the way they place their investments. Insurance industries are interested. Who do they provide services to? Who do they choose not to provide services to? And every corporation, every company, every engineer, every supplier in the supply chain are being held to greater levels of accountability about their efforts to build sustainable systems. You know, whether it's the commitment to lower carbon footprints, whether it's a commitment to ongoing community development. Just looking at some of those excellent videos from Oceania just shows some of the things that are possible when we think beyond the project or beyond the cycle to make a difference and to leave a legacy. whether we look at the development of the enterprises that support us, because more and more as I look around the world, we're not individual companies, we're ecosystems of companies. We work together. The things we do to support each other make us stronger together as companies, and that's what builds strength and builds an infrastructure and an integrated system that lasts. And I think I've learnt this, and we've learnt this over a long time by being an employee-owned firm. As an employee-owned firm, you don't rely on other people for capital. You raise your own capital from your employees. That takes long-term thinking to do that. It creates sustained and requires sustained performance to build that resilience and capability into your company. You need to think about sharing wealth rather than just creating it for a few. And you need to develop long-term sustainability thinking. And it's interesting when you look around the engineering profession, the number of companies that used to be employee-owned that are no longer so. Why is that the case? Well, I'd suggest to you they forgot to think about sustainability. You can't do it in a year. You can't do it in 5 years. It's long-term, consistent planning, thinking, delivering, developing, living your values, giving and creating the future of your organisation that enables you to survive and sustain your business through those changing times. So that's sustainability, the first thing I wanted to speak about. The second point I wanted to talk about over lunch today was the issue of trust. You know, we build trust every day with each other when we do what we say we will do. And it's interesting, around the world, it doesn't matter whether you're in the Philippines or Australia or the UK or the US or Canada or Chile, in some places, the challenge for people, government, companies, shareholders, boards, institutions generally, and future generations, wherever you go in the world today, is a destruction of trust. I don't think we trust each other the way we used to in many different ways, right? You see it, and you see it in the increasing conflict that exists between groups in community and institutions, between criticism of governments and the corporate world. And it almost seems that lack of trust is what contributes to the lack so often of a social license to be able to operate. This is something I think in the Philippines you see quite clearly in some way. I often hear, and perhaps have heard many times, a commentary on the things that government needs to do. But governments represent their people. They largely do and respond based on what the people they perceive, their politicians perceive, their society wants them to do. And sometimes within our industry sectors, it's the things that we've done, or in some cases not done, that have resulted in a lack of trust. And I think increasingly, as we look forward in every country, whether it's mining and resources, whether it's an infrastructure project, there's a need for all of us, corporations, organisations, representatives of government to build trust, to do what we say we're going to do. You know, to talk straight, to show respect, to be transparent when we've got it right and be transparent when we've got it wrong, to correct the things that are wrong, to show loyalty and commitment to all of our stakeholders, not just our shareholders, not just the direct community involved, our broader stakeholders, to keep our commitments and to extend trust. You've all probably experienced from time to time, and we see it from time to time, the delays that occur to projects over issues that shouldn't be issues to a trained engineering mind, to an educated person, issues we can see are solvable in many ways, but somehow the outrage that is stirred up around a problem or a project or a mining job or an infrastructure development outweighs any technical risk, any physical risk that comes up in relation to a project. I challenge us all as we look around the world, as we take our respective roles, to think about the issue of trust, how we build it, how we break it, and be careful about the steps that we take. Third thing I want to talk about this afternoon, and I've got 5 things, so you can see I'm making progress here as we go through. But the third thought, as I was contemplating about what to reflect on today, is the question or the issue of adaptation. Now, I look back 10 years in my own career, and what we think about, talk about, and do today are things that I couldn't have imagined even 10 years ago in our world, in our business. You know, you look at Dubai. Recently, someone was talking about Darren getting out to QC, you know, and you see Dubai experimenting with their flying Uber service for individual vehicles. Did you ever imagine 10 years ago that would even be contemplated seriously? Will it happen? I don't know, but it's being trialled right now around the world. Change. And what challenges me with that when I look strategically at a business that's been around for 90 years is the fear, motivating fear, of not being complacent and really trying to make sure that as organisations we change to adapt and be ready and responsive for our future. We know it's going to be different to what it is today. The resources sector in some parts of the world has seen this, you know, good advances in METs. The use of autonomous vehicles on controlled sites is a reality. Construction robotics in many parts of the world are being experimented with and getting better and better. I mean, you see the transport of resources and materials through driverless freight, trains and other vehicles, some challenges. BHP have a story and an issue they're dealing with at the moment on a train they lost control of, but it's here. It's here. What will it be in 5 years' time? What will it be in 10 years' time? And as humans, we're going to continuously improve and find ways to be more productive, more efficient, more safe in every part of our industry, and to be able to compete in an ever increasingly competitive global market. But think about how we adapt in that area. It's happening not just in engineering sector, it's happening in banking and finance, it's happening in all the sectors, it's happening in the education sector. Disruption enabled by technology. How will we adapt? How do we adapt? And when we do adapt, what is our responsibility to those who are displaced, those who haven't yet got the skill sets to be able to operate in a different world that's technically redefined and technologically redefined from the world we're currently in? We have a responsibility to think carefully about that, to prepare our workforces for the future, not just for today, to look at the development of our education systems to make sure the skills that are required for technologically advanced mining, construction, design, environmental management, every element of what we do, geotechnical investigation, every element of what we do to be able to operate in an automated and an adaptive world. So the fourth point I wanted to raise this afternoon is the issue, and I'll use the word carefully, the issue of the issue of nationalism, right? There's a lot of talk around the world about nationalism, and it's had an impact. I wonder, though, whether nationalism has really ever gone away. You know, we are tribal people, regardless of where we come from. We do relate to the tribes that we identify with in many ways. And the opportunity for governments and the responsibility for governments as the elected leaders of tribes are to, in fact, and have always been, to protect and to maintain and to look after the interests of their tribes. We might have forgotten that as globalism took force and we moved quickly and freely and maybe faster than regulation and legislation could keep up. But ultimately, we'll increasingly and continue, I think, to work and operate in worlds where we're multinational. We're multinational. I was interesting to read, and I don't know whether anyone's read it, the World Economic Forum and the scenario they did on mining and minerals to 2030. If you're doing any strategic planning and you haven't read it, it's worth a read, because they did something good in relation to scenario presenting, and they identified sort of 3 different possible worlds that the future could look like. You know, one was a green trade alliance, where it was the so-called green nations who agreed to trade with each other and exclude others. Possibility. How do our industries look? How do our businesses look in a world like that? They identified the scenario of rebased globalism. So free trade, or trade a bit like we see, but with a greater balance between those with resources and those with capital, and those who by other means, those with demand or markets, and how they may play in a multinational global world. Or they envisaged a world where there was resource security and nationalism goes to its extreme across all global nations. There's protectionism and trade tariffs on every space in which we move. And I don't know what the future is in any of those scenarios, but it's really useful to sit back for a minute and to think about what that might mean for us, and particularly us in a region of the world, and for us as global organisations and those who operate across multi-regions. I think national pride will always dictate that we respect regional differences, that we always take time, regardless of the company or corporation or organisation that we are, to understand national cultures, and that the things we do embrace multinationalism, they mitigate the risks of restriction by being good citizens and good corporate citizens in every country in which we operate. I was recently at the McKinsey Global Infrastructure Initiative in London just a couple of weeks ago. And it was interesting there talking to some different investors, the global pension funds. They have significant wealth, looking to invest in various regions around the world. And one of the things I just observed in terms of them was the way in which, and these were the Canadian pension funds I was having a chat with, the way they use their strategy of partnering with local pension funds in the countries in which they invest. And why do they do that? Well, I said it's a simple strategy. We're mitigating a sovereign risk. No government's going to restrict or move against or make legislation that's going to change and impact the pension investments of its own citizens. So you can see how through partnering within countries and regions, there's an ability to mitigate national and sovereign risk. So the final point, and I wanted to just mention as I speak here this afternoon, is the matter of diversity. You know, diversity, and we're in a world where more than skills, it goes to the issue of cultural diversity in terms of businesses. It goes through to the issue of gender diversity and the participation of women and different thinking in our workforce. I've been proud since I've been chairman to have a board of GHD that has gender diversity of 45%, right, in our board. It's changed the way we think. It's changed our perspective as a company to bring into our boardroom different thinkers and different ways, and it's shaping our success as a company. Yeah, we're in a sector in engineering, in mining, across the world where the development of women became and remains a significant challenge to have that balanced and that different view of thinking in our boardrooms, at our executive tables. It's good to see a little bit of diversity here in the room today, but often at functions like this it can be less than it is today. And as organisations, I think there is a challenge for us in terms of the issue of diversity. You know, I picked those 5 things to speak about because I think it's fundamental for every organisation to understand its purpose. What are you here for? Not just for today. What will you look back in 50 years' time, 30 years' time, 100 years' time? What will people say about you as an individual, about your organisation? What were you here for? Is that obvious? Did you create something that lasts? Did you do the right thing? Did you build something that is enduring? You know, a director of a company and a board of a company has an obligation. It has an obligation to act in good faith and in the best interests of a company. That company includes its shareholders, but it's not just its shareholders, it includes its stakeholders. It includes its employees, it includes its suppliers, the connected ecosystems of business. And I think collectively, as a group of companies in the Philippines, a group of companies in a sector in the Philippines, we can do so much more together to create a lasting community benefit. What do we stand for? Do we stand for sustainability? Do we stand for trust? Are we focused on the future and what we can adapt to? Are we committed to thinking in a multinational way, respecting the cultures in each region in which we work, building connected communities? Are we committed to thinking differently and embracing diversity? That's a challenge that I give myself regularly to stop, to think about. I'm sharing it with you today because I'd like to encourage others to look and think and do differently. I think if we do, regardless of the country in which we're operating, regardless of the restrictions and winds of change that might influence our world in which we live, I think we'll find greater acceptance for the things that we do. We'll find our reputation is greatly enhanced, that people will look beyond the immediate and see the long-term benefit of organisations, of people working together. You know, these are not new things in any way I'm talking about. You know, the companies around the world have embraced, and we embrace as GHD, the UN Global Compact and the sustainability goals that are endorsed by many organisations. Member companies of the International Council of Mining and Metals have documented 10 principles around which they are going to commit and operate, and many of those things cover the things I've spoken about today in terms of good business and doing the right thing. So I'd like to close with those comments. I'll leave it to you as a challenge. I was interested as I was just chatting around the tables earlier today. Many of those topics of conversation were coming up. I think they're present in our consciousness. Let's build a sustainable industry that makes a difference and is recognised for the so much good that it does across the world. Thank you.
What a great talk, huh? 10,000 gender diversified GHD staff across the world trust Rob Knott as national chairman to lead this company forth. You're a rare person and a rare speaker to give an inspirational talk. You held our attention without the use of any fancy slides. Very good. Watch out, Australia, the next Prime Minister of Australia.
There are quite a few of our members at ANZCHAM still struggling with that, including our own board. So could you give us some tips on what you did? Did you have targets? You know, how did you make that change effective?
It's a challenge, and we discussed a lot of things. I think at the end of the day, we set some goals. We didn't have mandatory targets. We wanted, and our women were quite insistent within our business that targets for the sake of targets didn't work for them. So we set some goals, and they were goals at all levels of our organisation, and it started with the board. Started with the top. I couldn't, as a chairman of a board that 9 years ago had no females on it, set a goal for our organisation without first setting the example. And over 9 years as director rotations and appointments came up, we searched the world for quality female directors who could help balance the board. And then in line with that, we raised awareness around the business. With the board setting a path, we made it clear to our executive that all senior appointments needed to present diverse candidates in their recommendation. So it wasn't good enough to go out to fill a role and come back with 3 white Anglo-Saxon male candidates and put them up and say this was the best. We said, you have to find a diverse candidate. Now, many of those diverse candidates didn't get up, they didn't have experience, they hadn't been considered for the role. But what it forced people to do was to have a conversation with diverse candidates who may not have been ready for a role. They went through an interview process. It actually created awareness, it raised their profile within the business, and over time that enabled them to take their own development path. But we had to be insistent, and occasionally you had to say, you haven't done the interview process well enough. We can't consider this until you've looked at a diverse set of candidates. That's at the upper ends where we're still challenged in the engineering space. At the lower ends, we focus on our graduate recruitment. You're not going to have a balanced workforce unless you're taking in as many female graduates as you are male graduates within your business. Now, we cover a range of areas where that can be easier sometimes. In the environmental sciences, we often find a greater level of interest and greater numbers of graduates from female graduates. But across the company, we've tried to maintain that balance in graduating. So bottom up, top down, and patience and persistence and awareness of the issues. I think there were other issues as we started the conversation, we also learnt about. I mean, our employment conditions can suit particular types of workers, and they can not be advantageous for other types of workers. And we had to flesh out some of those challenges across our business. Our expectations around travel, where people have other commitments and other roles they play in families. Our expectations around being able to work flexibly and making sure we've got the technology and systems that regardless of what anyone does day by day, they can work from home, they can work from the office. It's seamless, it's easy, it doesn't disadvantage, and those were some of the enabling factors we brought into play. So that's just a sample. There's probably a bunch of other things Ian or Darren might be able to contribute to here that they've done within their own operations, but it takes a long-term effort. It's not a problem that's solved overnight, but that's something we've been able to do, and we are seeing the improvement. But we look at I presented to our shareholders this morning, we've still got a 10% gap probably between our males who participate in our employee ownership program and females who participate in our employee ownership program. And what we've learnt by looking at that and understanding at it is that males and females invest differently. They need different information. Sometimes our financial advisors can present information. A male in the room is prepared to take the risk, go and invest. A female is going to go and consult, potentially with their partners in terms of that investment. And we've learned over time that we have to treat that different or provide flexibility in the way we present our own information around our own employee ownership plan. So all lots of elements to build the ecosystem.